Indianapolis Metropolitan Police announced a major break in a nearly 50-year-old cold case that involved 3 hitchhiking girls and one man who detectives at the time said was hunting. The elusive suspect behind the horrific attacks on the young girls in a field was revealed during a news conference, providing an answer to the investigation decades after it horrified the city. Thomas Edward Williams, dubbed the Slasher by police and the victims, died at age 49 in November 1983 inside a prison in Galveston, Texas. At the time of the abduction, Williams lived near the site of the kidnapping. In 1975, 3 girls trying to reach an amusement center hitchhiked along the 800 block of East Washington Street when a man picked them up. They soon realized something was wrong when the front passenger door was missing an inside door handle. The man, suspected to be in his 40s, drove the girls past the teen hangout and continued east into Hancock County, eventually heading off a county road and into a cornfield. There, he raped the youngest girl, 11 years old at the time, stabbed her 3 times in the throat, and another 15 times in her chest. He then slashed the throats of the 13-year-old and 14-year-old and left them all for dead. I heard him wrestling around, the car door shut, and the car start. The oldest victim stated during an interview in February 2018, "I was trying to see which way he was going to go because I wanted to get the heck out of there, and 13-year-old grabbed my leg, and it scared me so I fell down. I didn't know which way he went." The 2 couldn't find the youngest victim, who was the oldest victim's sister. The man had dragged her further back into the field. The oldest 2 girls said they thought he took her. "He picked me up and tossed me into the cornfield," the youngest victim said. She then passed out. The 2 oldest victims crawled out of the field and onto US 40 in an attempt to wave down help. 3 men pulled over to pick them up, took them to a motel, and phoned authorities. One officer, who arrived first on the motel scene, compared the cuts to the girls' necks as appearing similar to that of an accordion. Law enforcement then returned to the field to find the youngest victim. A manhunt for the assailant ensued for years. Newspaper clippings shared leads and provided suspect sketches from what the girls relayed to artists. A police detective in one news article stated the picture matched the description of a suspect known for abducting and raping girls from East Side schools. The Marion County Sheriff at the time detailed 12 detectives to the case. In December 1975, roughly 4 months after the attacks, Marion County prosecutors told the Daily Reporter that they had identified a Homer man as a suspect, but no charges had been brought. The search continued, but the case eventually turned cold. Steve Gibbs, at the time a detective sergeant with the Marion County Sheriff's Office, picked up the cold case and described the assailant this way in an interview in 2018. "He was hunting," he said. "I would hate to use the word professional, but he was a hunter of victims. Once you're in his car, it's like being caught in a spider web. There's no getting out." On January 9th, 2019, the women got their DNA swabbed after Sergeant David Ellison picked the case. The women went to the city-county building to get their DNA collected to compare against evidence. Without sharing details, Indianapolis police said in a news release that DNA is how they were led to the suspect after Indianapolis police partnered with AudioChuck and DNA Labs International. Addressing the 3 women, Deputy Chief Kendall Adams of the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department said, "I won't pretend to know what you're feeling today, but I do hope this is the first step in providing what closure the criminal justice system can." During the news conference, Mrs. Rotlertrick said that she had decided to forgive Mr. Williams for the attack. "I'm sorry if that makes anybody mad," she said. The last of the 3 women to speak was Mrs. Smith. She said that the identification of Mr. Williams had brought her closure and had brought her family justice. "It's put peace within my heart," she said. The cold cases of two East Bay women who were murdered and sexually assaulted 7 years apart in the 1970s in eerily similar circumstances, home intrusions while other family members were asleep, now have a suspect. A man who died in 2007, linked by DNA genealogy analysis to the victims. Hayward and Newark police announced Thursday that Fred Bernard Farnham, who died at the age of 73 in Oregon, was responsible for the slayings of Nellie Ann Hicks in 1972 in Newark and Theresa Pica in Hayward in 1979. Both women were found by family members who woke up in the morning to discover their loved ones' bodies bludgeoned and raped. An intruder had quietly entered their homes and attacked them as they slept in their living rooms. DNA evidence retrieved from Pica's body had been analyzed multiple times in the past 2 decades, and several people who were investigated as possible assailants were excluded from suspicion. The remains of one potential suspect, identified through the same process that found Farnham, were exhumed 2 years ago, and later excluded through DNA comparison to the crime scene evidence. That man, however, was on the same genealogical tree, police said. Then this past December, Hayward and Newark investigators again consulted with the FBI and contracted with the Texas-based genealogy forensics company, Othram and Santa Cruz-based Estrella Forensics, to reevaluate the DNA. The results led to Farnham being identified as the killer. Officials say Farnham is likely to be suspected in other unsolved murders and have alerted law enforcement in an array of other jurisdictions to revisit their cold cases for possible connections. The search for answers is not over. Hayward Police Chief Brian Matthews said at a news conference at Hayward City Hall, "We believe Farnham may be responsible for additional sexual assaults and murders in other communities." Matthews then outlined Farnham's geographical path through life, growing up in the Central Valley, then moving to the South Bay in the 1950s, and being convicted there for multiple sexual assaults in the 1970s. There is no indication he ever lived in the East Bay. He also lived in Nevada, Idaho, North Dakota, Alaska, and Oregon, where he died in the town of Cape Junction. Hicks, a 59-year-old fourth-grade teacher at Ashland School in San Lorenzo, was found dead May 10, 1972, in her Newark home. Her body was partially naked, and police determined that she had been raped and bludgeoned with a brick wrapped in pantyhose. The brutality was immediately apparent, with her head split open by the force of the blows. Evidence at the scene indicated that her killer entered the home through an unlocked sliding glass door and used manicure scissors to cut her dress and bra. The only forensic evidence that police recovered were fingerprints that, for decades, were never tied to a specific person. What made the killing even more notorious is the fact that Hicks' adult son and his wife, as well as her longtime friend, all lived in the home and were asleep as the slaying unfolded. That led police to suspect that the intruder knocked her unconscious before sexually assaulting her. A motive for the killing eluded everyone who knew Hicks, who was remembered as a well-liked, respected teacher. She left an abusive husband a decade prior, but that thread and interrogations of other men she dated proved fruitless in finding a possible suspect. Hicks' housemate, a fellow teacher, briefly spoke with her around 1 a.m. the morning of the killing, dozing off on a living room sofa. It was the last time she was seen alive. About 4 hours later, Hicks' son discovered her lifeless body in the same room. Hicks' wallet was missing, though it was later found a few blocks away next to a pair of blood-stained panties. David Hicks, the youngest of Nellie Hicks' 6 children and one of 3 still alive. The son who found the victim died over the holidays, thanked authorities who persisted to find closure in the 52-year-old cold case. Hicks called his mother a hero who raised a family of 6, and she worked full-time as a teacher. "I cannot express my gratitude enough for the police department and their dedication to this case. All of them worked extremely hard to bring closure to our family." Pica, 48, was discovered slumped over her couch, face down, by one of her twin 10-year-old daughters on May 15, 1979, at their home on Edlow Drive in Hayward. Her nightgown had been pulled up, exposing her legs. Her hands were bound behind her back with rope, and a blood-stained rock was found next to her. A shirt had been used to gag her, police found. She was last seen alive the night before by her 3 children. A front room window had been pried open, and the only witness account of an intruder came from a neighbor who heard rustling near the home in the middle of the night. Pica's purse was missing, and her wallet and other contents were later discovered in a neighbor's yard and in a garbage can down the street. Several people were investigated in the ensuing decades, but no suspects emerged until now. In a statement read aloud at the news conference, Pica's daughters similarly voiced relief at the resolution provided by Farnham's identification. "Our mother may now rest peacefully," the statement reads. "We have accepted the fact that whoever did this would never come to justice. Nevertheless, we thank God for your diligence and for never giving up. We can now move forward and close this painful chapter in our lives," Newark Police Captain Jolie Macias said after Pica was killed. Newark and Hayward police linked the crimes because of the discernible pattern of behavior shared by the 2 cases, which drove the belief that figuring out one case would solve the other. She also made a point to reciprocate the sentiments from the victims' survivors. "Today is truly about these families and their resiliency for the past 50-plus years," she said. "Anyone with information about criminal cases that could have connections to Farnham can contact Hayward Police Detective Rob Purnell at 510-293-7176. Nevada law enforcement officials announced Wednesday, January 31st, the closure of 2 cold cases after advancements in DNA technology linked a man to murders in both Las Vegas and Westminster, Colorado, nearly 16 years apart. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police said during a press conference that in May 1991, officers responded to reports of a suspicious death inside an apartment on the 1000 block of Monroe Avenue. The officers met with a friend and a relative of 31-year-old Sherry Bridgewater, who had just found her dead inside her apartment. The Homicide Division took over the case because of the suspicious nature of how Bridgewater's body was found, and an autopsy found she was sexually assaulted and murdered by strangulation. The homicide investigation team worked the case relentlessly over the years to solve the case, but unfortunately, it remained unsolved. In 2013, the department submitted a sexual assault kit obtained during the investigation for DNA examination. The DNA exam allowed detectives to develop a suspect profile of the person believed to have killed Bridgewater, though they could not put a name with the DNA profile. After entering the profile, detectives received a hit in the Cody's database that linked them to a second unsolved murder in Westminster, Colorado from December 1975. Detectives with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department immediately began collaborating with the Westminster Police Department, where they learned a woman named Teree Becker was found dead in a field. An autopsy conducted on Becker discovered she was sexually assaulted and died by strangulation. Both agencies had the same suspect profile, but at that time, the technology was not available to identify who the suspect was unless they obtained DNA from the suspect. Teree Becker was last seen December 4, 1975, hitchhiking to see her boyfriend in Brighton, Colorado. 2 days later, her body was found dumped in a field outside Denver. Becker had grown up in Casper, Wyoming, and after she graduated from high school, she moved to metropolitan Denver. 2 passing motorcyclists discovered Becker in the area of 100th Avenue and Lowell Boulevard in Westminster, about 10 miles north of Denver, along with her clothes and personal items, local police said. An autopsy determined she had been raped and died by asphyxiation, the Westminster Police Department said. Over the past 5 decades, investigators have returned to the case again and again. Finally, 48 years later, the mystery of her killer has been solved thanks to DNA technology and genetic genealogy. In 2018, both agencies worked together to submit the cases for forensic genealogy, in which the DNA from the suspect was sent to a lab and then to a company in Denver, Colorado. 4 years later, in 2022, detectives were able to identify the suspect as Thomas Martin Elliott. Westminster police said Elliott had spent a large portion of his life in and out of prison. Before Becker's 1975 murder, he committed a burglary in Lakewood, Colorado. He was convicted and spent 6 years in prison. He moved throughout the correction system and was released from prison in Las Vegas in 1981. After his release, he proceeded to commit a crime against a child and was sentenced to 10 more years behind bars, police said. He was released again in Las Vegas in 1991, then committed the Las Vegas apartment murder police used to create his DNA profile. Not long after this homicide, for unknown reasons, Thomas Elliott committed suicide on October 30th, 1991. The investigation conducted by both police agencies placed Elliott in Colorado at the time of Becker's murder in Westminster, Colorado, and in Las Vegas, Nevada in 1991, at the time of Bridgewater's murder. In November 1991, Elliott was pronounced dead by a self-inflicted gunshot wound in Las Vegas. He was later buried at a local cemetery in Las Vegas. While Elliott was identified as the suspect, detectives were not 100% sure until they were able to obtain DNA from his body. With the cost of exhuming a body being pricey, both police agencies worked together and approached the Vegas Justice League to help fund the exhumation of Elliott to obtain DNA. Elliott's remains were exhumed, and detectives were able to obtain tissue and bone samples, which were submitted to a lab. While at the lab, a DNA sample was extracted and compared to both cases. The results were both 100% matches, police said. On September 21, 1987, an Isle of Wight sheriff's deputy on nighttime patrol found 20-year-old David Knobling's Ford Ranger pickup truck abandoned at the Ragged Island Wildlife Refuge. Doors closed but unlocked, driver's side window down, and its radio left playing with no one inside. 2 days later, a beachcomber found the bodies of Knobling and 14-year-old Robin Edwards on Ragged Island's shoreline, roughly a mile from the James River Bridge. Both had been shot in the back of the head at close range. The case stayed cold for 36 years. According to State Police spokeswoman Corinne Geller, Wilmer had been one of several suspects investigators had considered over the decades, and upon learning of Wilmer's 2017 death, were able to posthumously obtain a genetic sample to compare to DNA preserved from the crime scene. Last summer, the Virginia Department of Forensic Science issued a certificate of analysis confirming a genetic match to Alan Wilmer Sr., Geller said at a January 8th press conference held at the state police's regional headquarters in Suffolk. The sample obtained from Wilmer's body also proved a match to DNA belonging to the killer of 29-year-old Theresa Howell, who was found raped and murdered in 1989 in the city of Hampton. According to Hampton Police Captain Rebecca Warren, Howell was last seen alive on July 1st of that year, a Saturday at 2:30 a.m. at the former Zodiac Club, which had been a popular night spot off Mercury Boulevard. Roughly 8 hours later, construction workers found female clothing at the edge of the woods off Butler Farm Road, and eventually came upon an unidentified woman's remains. Police identified the remains as Howell's and determined the cause of death to be strangulation after her family filed a missing person report in York County 3 days later. Articles of Robin's clothing had also been left near the Ragged Island crime scene in Knobling's truck. Robin's older sister, Jeanette Edwards Santiago, had recounted other similarities in a 2022 interview with the Smithfield Times ahead of the then Unsolved Crimes 35th anniversary. The then 19-year-old Santiago had been living on her own when she received a phone call from her parents on September 19, 1987, another Saturday, asking whether she'd seen Robin that evening. She answered, "No." "I didn't think a whole lot of it at the time because she had run away a couple months previously and was gone for 2 weeks," Santiago said, noting Robin hadn't been on speaking terms with her since she'd told on her sister for having ridden her bicycle from their parents' house in Newport News All the way to the Coleman Memorial Bridge in York County. As Santiago recalled from her mother's account, Robin had arranged a date with Knobling's cousin Jason on September 19th, which would become the last time anyone saw David or Robin alive. Jason, David, and David's brother, Michael, had shown up at the Edwards home in David's Ford Ranger to take Robin to a movie that ended up being sold out. The four went to an arcade instead, dropping Robin back at her parents' house around 10 p.m. Once home, Robin put her younger sister, Pam, to bed, but went back out later that night with David. Why the two ended up traveling all the way across the James River Bridge to Ragged Island, and whether they did so willingly, remains a mystery. Police didn't elaborate at the press conference on whether or how Wilmer knew his victims. For 36 years, our families have lived in a vacuum of the unknown, representatives from the Knobling and Edwards families said in a joint statement. "We have lived with the fear of worrying that a person capable of deliberately killing Robin and David could attack and claim another victim. Now we have a sense of relief and justice, knowing that he can no longer victimize another. We're not saying these cases are closed. They're resolved for right now, because we know there's a lot more work to do," Geller said. "The next task," she said, "is to try and piece together a timeline of Wilmer's life to identify if there were any other victims." Alan Wilmer, 63 at the time of his 2017 death in Lancaster, was 32 and working as a commercial fisherman at the time of the Ragged Island murders. He owned and frequently lived aboard a 1976 fishing boat named the Denny Wade, which he would dock at marinas in Gloucester and Middlesex counties and throughout Hampton Roads. He was known to drive several trucks, including a distinctive 1966 blue Dodge Fargo pickup with the custom license plate EMR-AW, a possible reference to his farming mainly clams and oysters. According to Geller, Wilmer was also known by the nickname Pokey. He also ran a tree service and was an avid hunter. Geller declined to elaborate on how and when police began to suspect Wilmer of either crime. Part of the cold case philosophy is to go back over, to start re-looking and going back through all the witness statements, all the evidence, and it's a very time-consuming, very complex, but very effective way, Geller said. Because Wilmer's criminal record didn't include any felonies. Police didn't have his DNA on file and weren't able to obtain a sample to test until after learning of his 2017 death. Wilmer, Geller said, was one of several suspects whose recently obtained DNA was submitted for analysis. Wilmer's family, in a written statement distributed at the press conference, said news of the DNA match came as a complete and horrific shock. "The man who committed these crimes was not someone we knew," the family's statement reads. "The revelation of what he's done has deeply impacted our family as we are forced to reconcile who we believed him to be with the unimaginable things he has done. We deeply mourn the victims' families and the community and have them in our prayers. We can't imagine what they've gone through for all these years. Let us know if you knew Wilmer, how you knew him, what encounters you had so we can build that timeline and find out if, in fact, there are other victims out there," Geller urged the public. Former Isle of Wight County Sheriff Charlie Phelps, who inherited the Ragged Island case upon his taking office in January 1988, told The Times in 2022 that he long suspected a different man, Samuel Reeder, whom the new DNA evidence appears to clear of the crime. A few months into his first term as sheriff, Phelps had been investigating the reported theft of several firearms from an Isle of Wight woman's home and came to suspect the woman's son. The son, Phelps told The Times, ended up confessing to taking a gun from his mother's home and selling it at a pawn shop in Mississippi, but then began talking about a roommate, Reeder, who'd lived with him and his mother in Isle of Wight. According to Blaine Pardoe's and Victoria Hester's 2017 book, A Special Kind of Evil, The Colonial Parkway Serial Killings, then 28-year-old Ryder had called in one of the original tips the sheriff's office had received when investigating David's and Robin's initial disappearance. As Phelps recalled, Reeder initially claimed to have stopped at Ragged Island out of curiosity on September 23, 1987, when David's and Robin's bodies were found. Then later claimed to have seen Knobling's truck parked at Ragged Island days earlier. Reeder's final version of events, Phelps recalled, was that he had taken money out of Knobling's wallet, which had been left in the truck, but denied having anything to do with David's or Robin's deaths. In a 2022 report on the then unsolved Ragged Island case, a copy of Reeder's death certificate states he was found dead in his Chesapeake mobile home the morning of August 8, 1990, hanging from a doorknob with an electrical cord around his neck. He was 31 at the time of his death. In the early morning hours of August 13, 2005, Rodriguez broke into a home, took a knife from the kitchen, and entered a bedroom where a 21-year-old woman was sleeping. He held the knife to her throat and attempted to sexually assault her. Rodriguez briefly moved the knife during the attack, and the woman was able to wrestle the weapon away. Mills County Sheriff Anthony Poole says it was a case that left the entire county shaken up. Sheriff Poole said, "This doesn't happen at all in this county." After a brief altercation, Sheriff Poole says the suspect fled the scene, but the suspect did leave behind a single drop of blood. It was a key piece of evidence collected by the Mills County Sheriff's Office, but not much could be done with it without the proper technology. The only thing left for investigators to do with it was to upload it to the Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS. The case went cold for almost 2 decades. To have something like this happen, it shocked all the residents of the county, and to have it just sit there for like almost 20 years just having evidence sitting here. It was a frustrating thing for everybody involved, said Sheriff Poole. Sheriff Poole says the Texas Rangers met with the office in 2021 and did a familial DNA search on the drop of blood. This was new technology made possible by the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, or SAKI, a federal grant for advanced DNA testing. They actually came back with a familial hit on it, he said. Sheriff Poole says former sheriff and lead investigator Clint Hammonds was able to test a pair of gloves and get an exact match. The match was 41-year-old Jessie Rodriguez. Rodriguez confessed immediately right off the bat and said he was glad that he finally got caught because it's been weighing on him for the last 18 years. Rodriguez said he broke into the home of the victim and tried to sexually assault her, but during the attempt, he was injured with a knife and fled the scene. Jessie Rodriguez of Zephyr pleaded guilty to attempted aggravated sexual assault of an adult and was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Sheriff Poole says it was a huge win for the county. The Texas Rangers released a statement saying this could not have been done without the DNA collected by Maricopa County Sheriff's Office and the help of Department of Public Safety Crime Lab forensic scientists in Waco, Garland, and Austin. Just makes you proud to help the public and serve your communities, said Sheriff Poole. The major cold case break was announced by the Texas Rangers just 1 day shy of Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. "We owe them at least this day to thank them," Send them positive thoughts and good wishes," said Charlie Wilkinson, Executive Director of Combined Law Enforcement Associations of Texas. Wilkinson says every day should be Law Enforcement Appreciation Day, but because it is not, he says it is important to thank them for all they do to make sure the public is safe. A man was indicted by a local grand jury on murder and burglary charges in the cold case killing of a Buckholz High School student that occurred 13 years ago. Alachua County Sheriff Emory Gainey and 8th Circuit State Attorney Brian Kramer announced the indictment of Timothy Thomas, 33, during a news conference Monday, February 5th. In the early morning hours of June 25, 2010, Sebastian Oxenius, 16, was playing video games with a neighbor at his home in the Benwood subdivision of Gainesville. Oxenius went to the kitchen, where he encountered a burglar who shot him multiple times. His family rushed to the kitchen and called 911. Oxenius was pronounced dead at the scene by paramedics. His brother, Boris Oceanias, said during the press conference, "We hope as a family that you can help us get to the final chapter of this, which is bringing my brother justice." He was only 16 years of age. His life was stolen. Deputies believe the car Thomas used in 2010 was borrowed from a female friend who is believed to have been inside the car while the murder occurred. While deputies do not believe she had prior knowledge of Thomas's plans that night, Gainey encouraged anyone with information to come forward. The woman is believed to have been 20, Hispanic and short with a heavy build. The vehicle is described as a white or cream Kia Sportage or similar model. "I know this has been a long and difficult road. We're making some progress, but we also understand it's not over yet. Rest assured, we'll be with you every step of the way," Gainey said during the news conference. In 2021, new evidence emerged that led to the identification of Timothy Thomas as a suspect. Thomas is currently serving a life sentence for the 2015 attempted murder of a Monroe County Sheriff's deputy in Stock Island, Florida. Thomas has a long criminal record with 23 felony charges and 8 misdemeanors. He has been arrested by multiple law enforcement agencies for battery, burglary, and attempted murder across the state, which includes arrests from the Key West Police Department to various Central Florida agencies. In 2015, Thomas was pulled over in Monroe County for driving with a stolen tag. A video played during Monday's press conference showed a firefight between Thomas and the deputy, who was shot in the chest but saved by his duty-issued body armor. Thomas was indicted December 23rd by an Alachua County grand jury on 1 count of murder while engaged in trafficking and 1 count of armed burglary. The indictment remains sealed, according to court records. His arraignment was held Monday morning at the Alachua County Courthouse, and Thomas is being held at the Alachua County Jail on a $1 million bond. Thomas's court-appointed public defender asked to withdraw from the case Monday, citing an unnamed and irreconcilable conflict of interest. On February 7, 1977, a woman hired 14-year-old Maria Honzell to babysit at the Suncrest Apartments off of North Nevada. She had contacted Maria earlier in the evening and everything was okay, but she did not return home until later that night. When she finally got back home, she found a horrific scene. Colorado Springs mother of 2 Janie Kozlika arrived home to find her babysitter dead with multiple stab wounds in her apartment bedroom. The 2 boys Honzell was babysitting. Kozlika's children were asleep and unharmed at the time police were called at around 11:20 p.m. When officers arrived, they found a 14-year-old Maria deceased with multiple stab wounds to the chest and neck. Kozlika and Honzell were neighbors and lived in the same apartment complex along the 5400 block of Nevada Avenue. One of the boys told police he had gone to sleep at around 8 p.m., but was awoken sometime later by commotion inside the apartment. He told investigators he saw a teenage boy in an apparent struggle with Honzell, holding her mouth shut. The boy said he heard yelling and stop it before the two entered Kozlika's bedroom. He described the suspect as being approximately 17 years old, 6 feet tall with acne, and wearing a fluffy coat and jeans. An autopsy report conducted in the days following Honzell's death determined she had died as a result of multiple stab wounds to the chest and a substantial wound to her throat. A homicide investigation was immediately launched by the department. Aside from the boy's witness statement, leads in the case were sparse, and the investigation went cold for decades until the department's DNA breakthrough. Ford said while Kernan was named in initial investigation efforts, he wasn't considered a suspect around the time of Honzell's death. While the case remained cold for decades, DNA technology advanced. Although the Colorado Bureau of Investigation found no direct match from the male DNA profile discovered on the clothing Honzell wore the night she died, the department's cold case unit continued its search for answers. In 2019, the police department contacted technology company Parabon Nanolabs to conduct a genetic genealogy analysis of the unknown male DNA sample discovered on Honzell's clothing. As time passed and technology progressed, it became clear that this case had the potential to move forward using genetic genealogy, said Tracy Thompson, a detective with Colorado Springs Police Department's cold case unit. According to department officials, Parabon was able to develop and submit a genetic data profile of the unknown male DNA sample to the public database as a way to find individuals who share significant amounts of DNA with the unknown subject, officials said. 5 years later, investigators found their match. William Kernan was identified. It was determined he was a student at a local college at the time of Honzell's death, and was an acquaintance of Kozlika, the woman Honzell was babysitting for. Prior to the Honzell investigation, the department has successfully used genetic genealogy in solving 3 other cold cases, according to Thompson. According to Kernan's obituary, he was 61 at the time of his death in Cheyenne Wells, located on the eastern plains near the Kansas border. Kernan was survived by a multitude of family members. He died of natural causes. Family members of Honzell in attendance Wednesday were emotional as members of the department, among other law enforcement officials, discussed the closing of Honzell's case. David Honzell, Maria's brother, addressed the room Wednesday morning, expressed gratitude for the department's work, and shared the family's wishes for privacy. Short and sweet, I appreciate you respecting our privacy. I would like to thank the whole department. This is a long time coming, Colorado Springs Police Department Chief Adrian Vasquez said. Maria was a vibrant and beautiful 14-year-old girl who deserved so much more life. I am very grateful that you trusted us, Colorado Springs Police Department, and we were able to solve this case, Vasquez said. Throughout the 4 decades, Colorado Springs Police Department detectives strived for justice in Honzell's homicide. Thompson estimates more than 15 detectives spent time on it, not including patrol officers, investigators with the Central Bureau of Investigation, and lab technicians who spent time piecing together evidence and developing forensic connections that went into identifying Kernan. An Oregon man has been found guilty in the 1980 cold case murder of a 19-year-old college student, all thanks to a piece of chewing gum. 4 decades ago, a medical examiner determined that Barbara Mae Tucker had been sexually assaulted and beaten to death. Now her killer has finally been identified. According to a news release from the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office, 60-year-old Robert Arthur Plimpton was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was not convicted of rape, however, as prosecutors could not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Tucker's sexual assault had occurred while she was still alive. On the morning of January 16, 1980, students at Mount Hood Community College in Gresham, Oregon, were on their way to class when they discovered 19-year-old Barbara Mae Tucker's body lying in a wooded area near a parking lot on campus. For decades, Tucker's murder went unsolved. Someone brutally took her away from us when she was so young and went on living their life after. Barbara's sister, Susan Pater, stated in 2021. Tucker was a sophomore business student at Mount Hood Community College at the time of her death. She was on her way to class on the evening of January 15th when she was spotted running out into the street from a wooded area. Witnesses recalled that Tucker was waving her arms as if trying to get their attention, but no one stopped to help. One witness reported seeing a man emerge from the wooded area and lead her back toward campus. The next morning, her body was found partially clothed, lying in some bushes. Nearby were her purse and books. Tucker was a tall, athletic woman. She had competed in a national basketball competition and won several awards while also pursuing a variety of hobbies, including sewing, knitting, and crocheting. Family and friends described her as goofy and ambitious. She loved the arts, wrote poetry and music, and planned to one day open her own craft supply shop. A major breakthrough in Tucker's case came when Cece Moore, a genetic genealogist who runs a group known as DNA Detectives, tested genetic material that was collected from the crime scene and plugged it into a database called GEDmatch. The analysis showed that Robert Arthur Plimpton was a likely contributor to the DNA profile. He was placed under police surveillance in 2021. As police began digging into Plimpton's past, a more sinister picture of the man came into focus. In 1985, 5 years after Tucker's murder, Plimpton was convicted of second-degree kidnapping in Multnomah County, for which he served a 30-month sentence. Between 1993 and 1997, Robert Plimpton served 2 more 6-month sentences for DUI charges and parole violations. He was also accused in 1997 of attempted sodomy and assault in an attack on a woman, although the case was ultimately dismissed as a grand jury found insufficient evidence to file a criminal complaint. While these incidents alone didn't point to Plimpton being Tucker's murderer, they showed that he was, at the very least, a violent and dangerous person. When investigators saw Robert Plimpton spit a piece of chewing gum onto the ground in 2021, they collected it and sent it off for analysis. The DNA profile developed from that piece of gum matched the vaginal swabs taken from Tucker's body during her autopsy. Plimpton, who was 16 years old at the time of the murder, pleaded not guilty. He claimed that he did not match the description of the man seen leading Tucker into the woods that night. While Plimpton's lawyers argued that there was reasonable doubt their client had killed Tucker, Judge Amy Baggio disagreed, saying at the trial, to be clear, this court has zero doubt whatsoever that Robert Plimpton beat Barbara Tucker in her head and face until she died. Plimpton is set to be sentenced on June 21st. In February 2009, police responded to a call after neighbors heard a struggle coming from a man's home in Ridgewood, a neighborhood located in Queens, New York. Upon entering, New York Police Department officers found a significant amount of blood in the hallway of the home and discovered a deceased male face down in a pool of blood. The man, identified as 64-year-old Rosario Prestigiacomo, had been brutally stabbed 16 times in the face, neck, torso, and extremities. He also suffered puncture wounds to various areas of his body and blunt force injuries to his head, torso, and extremities. New York Police Department crime scene detectives collected blood swabs from the crime scene, and the city's medical examiner used the material on them to create DNA profiles for the victim and an additional unknown male. The second profile was entered into databases, but did not match any profiles currently in the system. The case remained cold until March 2022. That's when the District Attorney's Office and the New York City Police Department Cold Case Squad joined forces with Othram, a private laboratory, and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security to use forensic genetic genealogy to try to learn more about the second person. Forensic genetic genealogy uses genetic research and DNA analysis to try to identify DNA profiles. Othram was able to use advanced DNA testing to create a comprehensive genealogical profile from blood left at the murder scene, the district attorney said. Meanwhile, the New York City Police Department's Forensic Investigations Division used databases and public records to build a family tree of the victim to try and determine possible suspects. That family tree helped lead investigators to Anthony Scalisi, Prestigiacomo's nephew. Scalisi, now 41, lived in Boynton Beach, Florida. Detectives from the New York City Police Department and the Boynton Beach Police Department surveyed Scalisi in Florida, working to obtain a DNA sample. On February 17, 2024, almost exactly 15 years after his uncle was murdered, police were able to retrieve a discarded fork that Scalisi had used. That fork was analyzed and a DNA profile matched the unknown DNA found at the murder scene, the district attorney said. Matching DNA was also recovered from under Prestigiacomo's fingernail. United States Marshals, the Boynton Beach Police Department, and the New York City Police Department's Regional Fugitive Task Force arrested Anthony Scalisi on May 14th. He was extradited to New York City on Wednesday, May 29th. Scalisi's lawyer, David Cohen, said his client had pleaded not guilty. He is being held at Rikers Island and will next appear in court on July 8th. Scalisi faces up to 25 years to life in prison if convicted. Investigators say at this time the motive is unclear. The district attorney's office said this is the first time forensic genetic genealogy has been used to identify and arrest a homicide suspect in New York City. I formed a cold case unit to bring closure to grieving families and seek justice on behalf of victims, said District Attorney Melinda Katz in the news release. This case is an example of the perseverance and determination of the investigators on this, and every cold case, and highlights the successful partnership formed between my office and the New York City Police Department Cold Case Squad. Defendants should not be able to evade justice no matter how much time has passed. The mother of a newborn girl found dead in a garbage can at a Phoenix airport in 2005 has been arrested after investigators dug back into the cold case using genetic genealogy. The newborn's body was found by a janitor in the trash in the women's restroom at Sky Harbor Airport in Phoenix on October 10, 2005, wrapped inside a plastic bag with the red Marriott Hotel logo. It was determined at the time that the newborn, who was about 1 day old when she died, had not been born in the airport bathroom, but was abandoned there. A medical examiner later ruled the baby's death a homicide by suffocation, according to police. The infant became known to the public as Baby Skylar. Despite widespread media attention, no suspects were named, and homicide detectives said the case went cold after all leads were exhausted. But modern forensic testing on the baby's body several years ago helped law enforcement to identify a potential maternal match, which led them to 51-year-old Annie Anderson, the suspect now charged in the baby's death. She was visiting Phoenix in October 2005 for a real estate boot camp. Lieutenant James Hester of the Phoenix Police Department told reporters at a news conference. Anderson admitted during an interview with investigators in January 2022 that she was baby Skylar's mother, the Phoenix Police Department said in a news release. Investigators had traveled to Washington State around that time to execute a search warrant for Anderson after forensic tests were done several months earlier. Agents with the FBI Phoenix Violent Crime Task Force worked with Phoenix Police cold case detectives to arrange those tests in November 2021. In addition to reviewing existing evidence in the case, which included DNA samples collected from the airport bathroom that were determined to belong to the baby's mother, the investigators used genetic genealogy to help pinpoint DNA samples that could help find her. Once a potential match was found, They were able to cross-reference it with evidence originally discovered at the crime scene to identify Anderson as a suspect. At the briefing held in February 2024, Special Agent Dan Horan, who supervises the FBI Phoenix Violent Crime Task Force, described genealogy testing an identity resolution technique that uses a publicly available genealogy database to link family matches to an unknown profile. In baby Skylar's case, the genealogy tests identified someone in the family tree who subsequently consented to their DNA sample being used on a one-time basis to push the investigation along and eventually identify Anderson. Horan declined to share details about the relative. A grand jury in Maricopa County ultimately issued an arrest warrant for Anderson on a first-degree murder charge, and she is now in custody in Washington state, police said. Anderson is being held in Washington as she waits to be extradited back to Arizona. She is expected to face multiple felony charges when she returns to Phoenix, police said. Lester said, Anderson is believed to be the sole suspect. He said, police know who the father of the child is, but based on the totality of the investigation, we have no reason to suspect he has criminal culpability. After more than 3 decades, a man has been arrested in Ohio for his connection with the 1989 killing of a woman in Pennsylvania's Lehigh Valley, thanks to advances in DNA. Rose Hnath, a widow who lived alone, was found dead on January 21, 1989. Police say relatives arrived at her home in the Coplay section of North Whitehall Township on the west bank of the Lehigh River and found her on the floor and the home ransacked. They went to her home after she did not appear at a church service she attended regularly. There were a number of items that were touched, that were moved. Thomas McAndrew of the Lehigh County District Attorney's Office said at the press conference. McAndrew also said that a month before her death, Hnath's home was robbed. It would be hard to believe that this woman goes her whole life leading a pretty simple life at this house. There's a burglary where a firearm and jewelry is taken, and now weeks later, that house is burglarized again, he said. An autopsy revealed Hnath had received multiple blunt force injuries and stab wounds. She had defensive wounds indicating she tried to fight off her attacker, Lehigh County District Attorney Gavin Holohan said in a news release. Detectives set out to find who was responsible for the elderly woman's murder, but ultimately the case went cold. In 2018, advances in DNA technology helped move the case forward. Then on Thursday, May 16th, authorities announced that they arrested who they say was responsible for Hnath's killing. Michael Breach, who was 30 at the time of the murder, lived in a community corrections facility in nearby Allentown and is not believed to have known Hnath, authorities said Thursday. Breach was arrested in Wind Gap, Ohio, where he had recently moved. Local law enforcement working in partnership with the Pennsylvania agencies made the arrest. He has been extradited to Pennsylvania and is being held in Lehigh County Jail without bail, authorities said. You don't get a free pass on murder, Lehigh County District Attorney Gavin Holohan. The cases stay around and the detective's memory stays around and the case files stay around. Breach was previously charged with escape and drug possession in 1989, which court records show he served 6 months for at the time. He was also reportedly arrested in 1993 for burglary in Pike County. He's also been charged with robbery, burglary, and aggravated assault. Despite Hnath's home having been burglarized weeks earlier, Breach is only being charged with the burglary from the day of the murder. The victim's family is gratified and relieved that there's been an arrest made. As the criminal case seeking answers in the murder of Kelle Ann Workman 35 years ago unfolds, the 3 men charged in her death made their initial appearances in court in March 2024. Workman was 24 years old when she was last seen at 6:15 p.m., June 30, 1989, mowing grass at the Dogwood Cemetery near the Pleasant Southern Baptist Church in Douglas County. While working at the cemetery into the evening wasn't unusual for Workman, her parents grew worried when she didn't return home that night. Perhaps what confused family and authorities the most was that Workman's keys were left in her car's ignition at the cemetery, and only about 2/3 of the cemetery's grass was cut. On July 7th, Workman's fully clothed body was found by someone who lived near the church. Workman's body was submerged in a creek in the Mark Twain National Forest near Oldfield, which was about 12-15 miles from the cemetery. According to previous newsletter reporting, due to her body's quick decomposition, authorities were unable to determine the cause of Workman's death, but they found no evidence of head injury or bullet holes. Authorities believed she was killed the night of June 30th or morning of July 1st. Workman was 6 feet 1 inch tall and 130 pounds. She had blonde hair and green eyes. She lived with her parents. Known as a quiet woman, Workman often completed house and yard work for people in the Dogwood area. During a press conference in February 2024, Douglas County Prosecutor Matthew Weatherman said 3 men have been arrested in connection with Workman's murder: Bobby Lee Banks, Leonard Banks, who also goes by Dwight, and Wiley Belt. In February, a grand jury indicted Bobby Lee Banks, Leonard Dwight Banks, and Wiley Belt for the murder, kidnapping, and rape of Workman. The murder charge in the indictment noted that the men killed her by striking her with a blunt object. Bond was set at $250,000 cash only for each man. Bobby Banks and Leonard Banks, who went by his middle name, Dwight, are brothers who were suspects throughout the initial investigation. In 1995, Dwight Banks spoke with the newsletter about the case. Bobby Banks declined comment, as he was advised by a lawyer. In 1990, Bobby Banks failed a polygraph test administered by the Missouri State Highway Patrol, which his brother said was due to frail emotions. An ex-girlfriend of Bobby Banks also told the authorities that he sought an alibi for the night Workman vanished. In September 1999, the Missouri Highway Patrol Crime Lab issued warrants for 2 men, one of which was Dwight, hoping to find DNA that tied them to Workman's death, according to previous newsletter coverage. However, nothing conclusive came from this testing. Belt did not feature prominently, if at all, in previous media coverage. But at the February press conference, Douglas County Sheriff Chris DeGay said all 3 had always been top of the list subjects. Belt is the only one being represented by his own lawyer, Joe Passanese. Bobby Banks and Dwight Banks were both assigned public defenders, John Adamick Jr. and Christopher Hatley, respectively. All 3 men pleaded not guilty at their arraignments. Attorneys for both Dwight Banks and Belt argued for a reduction in bond. During Dwight Banks' hearing on the issue, Weatherman was opposed to any reduction to the bond or any pre-trial release. All 3 charges are in the first degree, meaning each carries the possibility of life in prison. Hatley, Dwight Banks' attorney, noted his client is 64 years old and has pancreatic cancer, currently in remission, type 1 diabetes, and a heart condition. Hatley told the judge the diabetes was Dwight Banks' main concern, with worries about receiving insulin as necessary while in jail. Dwight Banks does not have any prior convictions. He's been interviewed off and on through the years, so he was aware he was a suspect, Hatley said at the hearing. So, if he wanted to run, he's had ample opportunity, and he's never gone anywhere. I don't believe he's a danger to the community. While Carter noted he is not against pre-trial release, he said he would like to have more details on Dwight Banks' residence in Ozark County and the circumstances surrounding his proposed release before making a decision. Belt, however, was more successful in getting the go-ahead to leave the jail. In Belt's issue of bond, Weatherman said he had spoken to the family, and he has agreed to allow Belt's bond to be converted from cash only to a personal surety bond in the same amount meaning the entire amount does not need to be paid in cash in order to bail Belt out. Belt, who also lives in Ozark County, was released on house arrest with GPS monitoring and allowed to leave only for medical, court, or lawyer visits. At the February press conference, Weatherman said he planned to file motions for a speedy trial to move the case along as quickly as possible. He noted that the break in the case was thanks to a witness who came forward and shared key information. Pam Workman, Kelle's sister, stated that the family never thought this day would come. After evading law enforcement for more than 2 decades, the suspect in the 1999 killing of Blanca Arellano was arrested and extradited to the United States. Francisco Arellano was arrested in Mexico, has been convicted of killing his estranged wife after she was found dead in a Yuba City apartment with more than a dozen stab wounds in 1999, the Sutter County District Attorney's Office said. Francisco Arellano was found guilty of murdering 32-year-old Blanca Arellano on July 26, 1999. Blanca was found dead in her apartment on the 600 block of Queens Avenue. Francisco Arellano was the prime suspect, but authorities said he took off to Mexico with his and Blanca's 2 children after Blanca's death. In 2019, investigators received information that Francisco was living in the Mexican state of Morales. The Yuba City Police Department and the Sutter County District Attorney's Office worked with the Office of International Affairs to extradite Francisco. On June 22, 2022, he was taken into custody and extradited from Mexico on November 18, 2022. During the testimony, the District Attorney's Office said Blanca was stabbed 13 times in her chest, arms, and right leg. A phone cord was wrapped around her neck 4 times. Francisco said he acted in self-defense, prosecutors said. But District Attorney Jennifer Dupre said there is no valid theory of self-defense in this case. Blanca's sister Sonia said, "I think my entire family, we're just in disbelief that the day has finally come." Sonia and her family still talk about Blanca in the present tense. For Sonia, her sister is with her whenever she hears a song by the Bee Gees or sees New York, a place her sister longed to visit. She's still with us. She's just, her body isn't here with us. A song will trigger a moment of our lives, something she used to say or something she used to do. Something funny that happened in the family gatherings, said Sonia. Blanca was a lover of music, often playing and practicing at home while they were growing up together. She listened to the Bee Gees as a teenager and had a natural skill for designs and sewing. Francisco Arellano is facing 25 years to life in prison. A discarded cigarette in New Jersey has led to an arrest in a 12-year-old murder case. On March 24, 2012, at 3:36 a.m., 34-year-old Julio Torres was shot and killed while sitting inside his vehicle in the parking lot of the West Reading Diner in Pennsylvania. When the identity of the suspects eluded authorities for months, the West Reading Police Department formed a joint task force in May that year with the District Attorney's Office. Surveillance video from the diner showed Jomaine Case and the gunman holding styrofoam cups just prior to the shooting. Those cups, including one with a bitten-off piece, were collected from the crime scene as evidence. The cups and bitten piece were sent to the Pennsylvania State Police Forensic Crime Laboratory for DNA analysis. An unknown man's DNA profile was developed from the bitten-off piece, but didn't match any of the samples contained within existing DNA databases. Another DNA profile, which was linked to Case, was also found on one of the styrofoam cups. A DNA profile developed from one of the cups led to the arrest of 22-year-old Jomaine Case on May 9, 2012, who was eventually convicted for his role in the fatal confrontation. Investigators determined he was not the person who shot and killed Torres. Police said Case and an unidentified gunman had argued with Torres in the parking lot of the diner. Torres was then shot and killed shortly after. Police said there was no information that indicated that Torres knew Case or the unidentified gunman prior to the shooting. Authorities determined that the gunman was likely a man visiting West Reading from New York. But with no leads to go on, the investigation became cold. The person responsible for pulling the trigger and shooting Julio Torres was never identified, Berks County District Attorney John Adams stated. A break came when investigators uncovered a cell phone photo from 2012 that they believed showed the suspected shooter at a party hours before the homicide took place. Facial recognition software helped them identify the suspect in November as Vallis Slaughter, who is originally from Brooklyn, Adams said. Slaughter was tracked in December 2023 to Jersey City, where investigators determined he was living with his mother. Detectives surveilled the home for weeks until on February 9, 2024, they witnessed Slaughter discarding a cigarette butt onto the sidewalk before entering the residence, Adams said. Detectives collected the cigarette and sent it back to the Pennsylvania Forensics Lab for analysis. In March 2024, their suspicions were confirmed when the crime lab notified the investigators that DNA from the filter of the cigarette matched what was obtained from the second foam cup in 2012, according to the district attorney's office. Slaughter, who Adams said is also a suspect in a homicide in Brooklyn, was arrested March 20th by Jersey City police at his mother's home. Just having that DNA sample isn't enough. But we were able to utilize technology to identify this individual. And now we have confirmed that identification with DNA, Adams told reporters. We are not going to give up, and if we can continue to pursue justice for the victim, we will do so. Vallis Slaughter, 39, was arrested and is set to be extradited to Pennsylvania for his first court appearance. He has been charged with murder, aggravated assault, and conspiracy, said Berks County District Attorney John Adams at a news conference. After more than 3 decades, Ventura police have solved the murder of a 42-year-old woman who was found dead on a hillside in 1991. A family now has closure, 33 years after their loved one was found dead in California, because authorities were able to use DNA and forensic evidence to find her killer. The remains of the victim, 42-year-old Danielle Clause, were found on July 16, 1991, near downtown Ventura, about 70 miles northwest of Los Angeles. The victim was found partially unclothed with multiple blunt force injuries. Retired Lieutenant Douglas Aldridge, who originally worked on the case, said in a video released by the police department. She was last seen the night of July 15, 1991, speaking to a male driving a small white pickup truck with pinstripes. She had also been sexually assaulted, the Ventura Police Department said in a news release. She was reported missing the next day by her husband, who said she never came home that night. We tend to over-collect evidence because you just don't know what would be important later on in the investigation that could lead to a breakthrough, Aldridge said, adding that investigators collected fingerprints, cigarette butts, trash, papers, rocks, and anything else that looks disturbed. They also canvassed the area looking for a white truck that matched the suspect's vehicle description. Once we investigated every avenue available at the time, the case was suspended and considered cold, Aldridge said. When the case went cold, it lay dormant for over 25 years before being re-examined by Officer Tyler Buck. Detectives retested crime scene evidence from the case in 2021, then used forensic genetic genealogy to create a family tree for the suspect. They identified her killer as Larry Devin Welch, who died in 1999. There was no known connection between Welch and Clause at the time of her murder, police said. Buck said when he first found out about Clause's case, the file was over 1,000 pages long. He studied the case, hoping to find something previous investigators missed. I could see that retired Detective Doe Aldridge and his team at the time did a great job documenting the scene, gathering evidence, Buck said in the police department's video. The DNA sample from the case was entered into CODIS, a national database of DNA profiles from convicted offenders, unsolved crime scene evidence, and missing people. However, there were never any hits, Buck said. He reached out to the crime scene investigations team and looked through the evidence. They learned the murder weapon, a rock, and the victim's fingernail clippings had never been tested. After a series of meetings, investigators requested in May 2021 that the evidence be tested to compare DNA on the rock and the fingernail clippings to the DNA from the sexual assault kit, said forensic specialist Gabrielle Weimer. This test would either confirm or deny that our murder suspect and the rape suspect were one of the same, she said in the video. By September 2021, all the DNA came back as a match to one unknown suspect. The team knew it needed to use modern methods such as familial genealogy to solve the case, which can be expensive, Weimer said, adding that they reached out to multiple agencies to connect the dots. Senior forensic genealogist Misty Gillis sent the DNA sample to another agency, Gene by Gene, which specializes in biotechnology and genetic testing, Weimer said. Once the genetic profile was built, Misty uploaded it to all the genealogy databases like Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, MyHeritage DNA, Family Tree DNA, and many more, Weimer said. By July 2022, our genealogists built out part of the family tree of our suspect. They were able to find a living family member who had an interest in familial genealogy. She had already built a family tree herself. Investigators went to connect with her in San Diego, where she gave them a breakdown of her family tree and a DNA sample. Through her DNA sample analysis, we learned that she was a first cousin match, Weimer said in the police department's video. This is a huge breakthrough for us. In revisiting her family tree, we knew she only had 2 male first cousins, and our search was narrowed even further. Now, investigators were focused on those 2 cousins, Welch and his brother. Only one brother was alive. He lived in Virginia. At this point, we're kind of at a standstill on how to proceed, Weimer said. We didn't have the staffing or the resources available to send 2 of our detectives out of state to sit and obtain a surreptitious DNA sample. In October 2023, a cold case sexual assault unit in Ventura further developed a profile on both Welch brothers to help figure out which one may have committed the crime, Eric Nazarenko, Ventura County District Attorney, said in the video. We learned that Larry Welch, the deceased brother, had brown hair and hazel eyes, while the living brother had blonde hair and blue eyes, Nazarenko said. This analysis revealed with a high degree of confidence that the suspect had brown or green eyes and brown hair consistent with the appearance of Larry Welch. Still, investigators needed DNA from his living brother to confirm he was not the suspect. Virginia State Police helped connect with Welch's brother, who was very helpful, the district attorney said. His brother gave investigators information about Welch's life and gave them a sample of his own DNA. Virginia State Police tested his DNA and ruled him out as a suspect in the victim's case. Further, they established that the living brother was a full sibling of the suspect, Nazarenko said. This result confirmed that the suspect DNA found at the crime scene belonged to Larry Welch. Weimer, the forensic specialist, said Welch owned a white Ford Ranger, had a P.O. box in Ventura the year Clause died, and was seen with her around that time, and was seen by another witness in the area where her body was found. Weimer was able to speak to Clause's sister, Marcy Forte, who said she remembers going to see her sister's remains. I remember she was so badly beaten that she was unrecognizable, and I didn't want my mother to see her like that, Forte said in the police department's video. I always prayed that I'd be able to know who did this. My prayers were answered. She said her sister was so much more than a victim of a brutal murder. She was a good person with a mighty soul, and she was taken way, way too young. It was May 9, 2008, when police in Ewing, New Jersey, were called to a scene where a victim, later identified as Leroy Julious, was assaulted near a carport in the 300 block of Hazel Avenue in Ewing Township. His body was dragged across the street to an empty lot, and his pockets were turned inside out. The 47-year-old had severe head trauma and died on the scene. When officers got to the scene, they found a car that was parked diagonally in front of a home with multiple people standing outside. One of those people was Jason Howard, who was later identified as one of the suspects, was standing by the open driver's door of the car, police said. The witnesses were able to show the officers where the victim, Julious, was lying in a gravel lot on the ground. Police said that Julious had severe head trauma with blood on his face, head, and neck. They noticed that his pockets were turned inside out. Officials pronounced Julious as dead at the scene. As officials worked to investigate the case, they concluded that robbery was the motive behind the deadly incident. Investigators say they learned that Leroy Julious was known to always have money in his wallet. It was noted that his wallet was not on him when he was found on the ground. The attack on Julious is believed to have happened in the garage carport of a house nearby before he was dragged to the gravel lot, officials said. It was sad and hurtful to know that there's someone out there that killed your brother, Roger Julious said. The case went cold for about 15 years and didn't heat up until last year when the Mercer County Homicide Task Force received new information, and the case was reopened. Investigators said physical evidence was resubmitted to the New Jersey State Police Central Regional Laboratory, which included DNA evidence, and advances in technology helped crack the case wide open. According to a criminal complaint, DNA evidence found under Leroy Julius's fingernails belonged to 36-year-old Breon Goodman of Trenton, and the victim's blood and medical insurance card were found inside the SUV Jason Howard, 41, was seen standing next to the day of the crime. Both men have now been charged with first-degree murder. I wish my dad was still living. That really hurt him bad, Roger Julious said. Investigators said a motive appears to be robbery because Leroy Julious was known to carry money. In a statement, New Jersey Attorney General Matthew Platkin said, "For 16 years, the senseless, cruel death of Leroy Julious has gone unsolved, but law enforcement did not forget and did not give up. We hope the charges bring a measure of relief to the victim's grieving loved ones. It brings a little closure that they're finally caught, but it's not going to bring him back to us. But it is justice finally served," Roger Julious said. More than 2 decades after authorities discovered a University of Georgia law student's body at her apartment, where they say a fire was set intentionally, a man has been arrested and charged in connection with the cold case. Tara Louise Baker was found dead in her Athens, Georgia home by Athens-Clarke County firefighters on January 19, 2001, a day before her 24th birthday. Tara Louise Baker, born on January 20, 1977, in East Point, is remembered not only for her academic achievements, but also for her remarkable character. A graduate of Lovejoy High School in 1995, Baker went on to attend Georgia College in Milledgeville, where she graduated cum laude in 1998 with 2 bachelor's degrees. Friends and classmates recall Baker as a beacon of kindness and inclusivity. Her commitment to social justice was evident early on as she consistently advocated for those less fortunate and often led efforts to include all students in academic activities. Her academic prowess was matched by her dedication to making the university experience better for everyone around her. Baker was known for her ability to bring people together, ensuring that no serious student felt excluded from study groups or class projects. On the morning of January 19, 2001, Athens Clarke County firefighters discovered Becker's body while responding to a fire at her Athens apartment located at 160 Fawn Drive. Investigations concluded the fire was an act of arson, part of a deliberate and heinous crime that abruptly ended the life of the 23-year-old student. Becker was last seen by friends around 7:30 p.m. at the library. That same friend got a call from Becker around 9:46 p.m. to make sure they got home safely. She told her friend she planned to leave the library around 10 p.m. That was the last time she was seen. Becker died of strangulation, stab wounds to the neck, and blunt force trauma to the head. The homicide investigation into Becker's death ran cold for 23 years. On Thursday, May 9, 2024, state and county investigators said Edric Lamont Faust, 48, was arrested and faced several charges in connection with Becker's death, including felony murder, aggravated assault, arson, and aggravated sodomy, the news release says. Faust, a resident of Athens, remains in jail on a $15,000 bond, according to Clarke County Sheriff's Office jail records. Biological evidence and DNA science led to the arrest, Chris Jose, director of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, said at a press conference earlier this month. Jose declined to comment on what led them to Faust, only saying, investigative work by the cold case unit and local investigators led to this update. No connection was discovered between the victim and suspect, he added. The victim's mother, Virginia Becker, speaking through tears, with a large photo of her deceased daughter just behind her, said she was so grateful for the arrest. I am Tara's mother. I always will be Tara's mother, she said. She thanked everyone for their prayers and told other families whose loved ones have been killed to hold on to hope. The GBI's cold case unit partnered with the Athens Clarke County Police Department in September 2023 to conduct an in-depth review and analysis of the ongoing investigation into Becker's death. According to the news release, Athens Clarke County Police Chief Jerry Salters, who was an officer at the crime scene in January 2001, said in a statement that he'd hoped for years Becker's family would find justice. I remember being there during that horrific time, Salters said. Seeing this case now full circle, I appreciate the hard work of the detectives, from then and now. Knowing that the evidence collected at that time contributed to the arrest today gives me tremendous pride in all the officers who worked this case over the years. A woman's body was found in the trunk of her car nearly 4 decades ago. Police and prosecutors say her estranged husband was the prime suspect from the beginning, but only charged him on March 28, 2024. It is unclear why Fred Wagner Richardson was not charged since his wife's murder in March 1987. Both the police and Racine County District Attorney's Office could not speak to the decisions or lack of them in that time. But officials say they are now comfortable the puzzle pieces are there to bring charges. The partially clothed body of Derby Wagner Richardson was found in the trunk of her car. It was parked in an alley across the street from the factory where she worked the night shift as a security guard. Derby was 28 years old on the day of her death, March 22, 1987. She had 2 young daughters, ages 3 and 7, and hopes for the future, including a career in law enforcement. Ideally, it would be my sister Ruth, Derby's mother, who passed away in April 2022. Standing here, said Ellie Schmidt, Derby Wagner Richardson's aunt. She fought so hard and for so long to get justice for her daughter's murder. The case against Fred Wagner Richardson has been described as long on motive, but short on actual evidence. Derby Wagner Richardson was divorcing her husband at the time she was killed, and she had a restraining order against him after he allegedly threatened to kill her, and then choked her until she was unconscious. Fred Wagner Richardson was particularly upset that he would lose money from his rental properties as a result of the divorce. On the day of her death, Fred and Derby met with their attorneys to discuss dividing the marital properties. Reportedly, the defendant was upset about sharing the proceeds from rental properties. He reportedly cried and said, "I'm very hurt. I'm very hurt." He reportedly looked pointedly at Derby and said, "I don't like being hurt," before abruptly leaving the meeting. Derby told her attorney she was in fear for her life and Fred was going to kill her. Her attorney reportedly reached out to the Racine Police Department to keep an extra watch on Derby. However, within 12 hours, she would be dead. Derby worked the third shift as a security guard at Steiberg Engineering, 1600 Gould Street. On March 22, 1987, she failed to make the 1 a.m. check-in. A representative of Steiberg called the Racine Police Department to report a missing person. The representative said Derby was a responsible person who did not miss check-ins. Racine Police Department officers responded to Steiberg, where they found evidence of a struggle and determined Derby did not leave the property voluntarily. Investigators determined that the suspect gained access to the site by cutting a section of chain-link fence along the east side of the property. Crime scene photos from the time show a shoe print on the property with a pointed toe, similar to a cowboy boot, which investigators learned the defendant wore. At about 8:24 a.m., the Racine Police Department discovered Derby's car. In the trunk, they found Derby. She was nude and her mouth was bound with white duct tape. She had an injury to her head and her throat, and wrists were cut. A pathologist later determined the injury to her head was likely made by bolt cutters. She was still wearing her jewelry, so robbery was ruled out as a motive, and there was no evidence of sexual assault. Investigators found the uniform Derby wore to work torn into pieces and scattered along Spring Street. Investigators also recovered a pair of black and red bolt cutters, which a relative identified as the same type Fred Wagner Richardson owned. A sales receipt was recovered indicating the defendant purchased a new pair of bolt cutters after the homicide had occurred. A Racine Police Department officer on night duty reported seeing a car similar to Derby's backed up to the rear service door of 1212 State Street at about 3 a.m. The property was owned by Fred Wagner Richardson. Residents of the property informed police the basement and rear door where the car was parked were used exclusively by the property owner and not the renters, who did not have keys or access to it, according to the complaint. Fred Wagner Richardson allegedly made comments about his whereabouts at the time his estranged wife died that were later discovered to be untrue. He told one friend he would be busy over the weekend because he had his children. According to the criminal complaint, that was false because it was Derby Richardson Wagner's weekend with the children. He told another friend he was sick in bed all weekend. DEA Patricia Hansen said she believes there is enough circumstantial evidence to proceed to trial. The case will be transferred to Judge Robert Repischak, who will preside over the proceedings. A status hearing was scheduled for 1:30 p.m. on July 12th. The defendant is out of custody on $50,000 cash bail. Fred Wagner Richardson also pleaded not guilty to a slew of weapons charges in 2 cases, including 4 counts of possession of a firearm by a person convicted of a felony and possession of an electronic weapon. A nearly 3 decades-long cold case involving the sexual assault, stabbing death of a young Jacksonville mother has led to the arrest of a 69-year-old man in North Carolina. On August 10, 1996, Valerie Ames was found stabbed and beaten to death in a unit of the Riverside area Courtyard Apartments at 1606 King Street. That was supposed to be vacant due to the arrests of the man and woman who lived there. The man's daughter went to check on the apartment and found the door unlocked and an unfamiliar woman dead in a pool of blood. Ames was the mother of 2 young daughters, ages 5 and 9, at the time of their mother's murder. The 2 girls and their grandmother were in England when they received the phone call informing them of Ames' death. One of Ames' daughters, Michelle James, spoke following the announcement of the arrest. Holidays, birthdays, graduations, weddings. The birth of her 6 grandchildren all passed without her, Michelle said through tears. Those long years have done nothing to numb the pain of her non-existent. Her pain and her torture have all become our pain and torture daily. Standing here today, almost 28 years later, we now have some answers on our beautiful mother Valerie, and she has finally reached her chance to have justice. The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office announced the arrest of Jerry Phillips as part of its reinvestigation into the case of 31-year-old Valerie Ames. Sheriff Waters said he can't share much information in the case, and what led to a suspect because it's now in the hands of prosecutors. But he said it was not random or a stranger situation. The arrested man also said he and his family did not know her once they found out about Ames' death, but that she looked familiar, according to reports. Ames lived and worked in Arlington and did not have a car, so it was unclear how she ended up at the apartment. One of her daughters also in the last few years stated that Ames contacted authorities 3 months earlier to report she had been assaulted by a police officer. Nothing came of it, though. James also said some people told them her mother was pregnant, but nothing indicated that in the case file. In addition, a woman supposedly contacted police informing them she had information in the case and would make a deal with them. Not too long after that, she was found dead. Life as Sakeithia Tyler changed forever when her brother Norman Rich was shot and killed inside his Washington, D.C. home over 3 decades ago. She's been fighting for justice ever since and has never given up hope that his killer would be found. On March 28, 2024, exactly 34 years to the day that the father of 3 was gunned down, Sheila Brown, the mother of his children, was charged with second-degree murder in his death. Miss Brown, now 66, was questioned at the time, but never arrested until now. Miss Brown was taken into custody in Annapolis, Maryland on Wednesday, March 27, 2024, according to the Metropolitan Police Department. On Thursday, she was indicted in D.C. Superior Court on murder and obstruction of justice charges. When Miss Tyler got the call from the detective, she was in disbelief and bursting with excitement to share the news. "I never gave up hope," she stated. "My brother's been dead for 34 years. 34 years. It's time for answers. It's time for justice." Mrs. Tyler added that she knows this is not the end, only the beginning, but said it's one step closer to closure for her family. Ever since his death, Miss Tyler has been seeking justice for her brother's murder. "When people tell me to move on and to live my life, I tell them Norman is my life," she said. She has shared updates on her Facebook page Justice for Semo and has given interviews to the local DC news outlets, as well as NBC's Dateline. "People need to hear his story," she said. "We've tried for years to get people to listen. It's time for everyone to hear the truth about what happened to him." Miss Tyler never called her brother by his name Norman, but instead his nickname Semo that was given to him by his grandmother, who later explained it was because he was intuitive and could see more of the world around him. Mrs. Tyler told NBC's Dateline in 2021. Rich, who was the eldest of 7 siblings being raised by their mother in Washington, D.C., was like a father to the children and worked hard to provide for them, Miss Tyler said. She was 26 years old when her brother was killed. In March 1990, Rich was living at a home on M Street Northeast, Washington, D.C., with his girlfriend Sheila Brown and their 3 children. It was Miss Brown who found his body in their bedroom around 1 p.m. and called 911, according to the initial Metropolitan Police report. He had been shot multiple times. Miss Tyler said she was in shock when she heard the news and went to her brother's house, which was now a crime scene. "I just went to the floor," she stated, relaying the tragic day, something she has done more than she wished to do. The moment their mother, Helen Rich Frazier, found out about Rich's death was captured in an image by a Washington Post photographer and featured on the Metro section's front page. according to Miss Tyler and the original lead detective in this case. Mrs. Brown said 2 men came to their door the morning of March 28, 1990, looking for Rich. Miss Brown said she recognized one of the men as someone called Ducky. She said she did not know the other man. She told Rich they were at the door and left the house to run errands. She said, Semo, there are 2 men down here to see you, Miss Tyler recalled her saying. And she claims she left the 2 men on the outside, locked the door, and went about her business. That's what she said. When she returned, the door was wide open, she said, and Mr. Rich was dead. Miss Brown told police she would help them with a composite of the 2 men she claimed came to the house that day. But Detective Ruben Sanchez Serrano, the original lead detective who is now retired, had said in previous interviews that he believed the answer to the case lies with the family. In a verbal statement he collected from Mrs. Brown that day, he previously told Dateline that he remembered her being very reluctant. She was combative, he said, despite her offer to help with the composites. For years, multiple detectives from the Metropolitan Police Department's Homicide Branch have urged the public to come forward with information and offered up a $25,000 reward. Several people were questioned and potential suspects emerged in the fatal shooting, but nothing led to an arrest. In January 2021, Detective Michael Fulton took over the investigation, hoping that a fresh look at the case would finally bring it to resolution. It was Detective Fulton who called Miss Tyler to give her the news of the arrest. Miss Tyler, while overjoyed at the news, admitted that it's heartbreaking that it took so long for an update in her brother's case. Their mother, who had been battling cancer of the larynx before Rich's death, died a year after the fatal shooting. Miss Tyler said that even though her mother had been sick for quite some time, it was her brother's murder that finally ended her life. They are now together and buried next to each other at a gravesite that Miss Tyler visits often. Before she died, she told me, "You stay on this," she recalled. She told me to never give up hope, and I haven't. I never did. And look where we are. Hope is what brought us to this day. Brown is now facing charges of second-degree murder and obstruction of justice. A hearing is scheduled for June 28th. In June of 1964, a fisherman made a grisly discovery at a gravel pit in Tip City, Ohio, a severed human arm. 4 days later, another fisherman found a burlap bag in a nearby canal, which contained a torso. Eventually, a human head and a leg were discovered in the same waterway. The police's extensive investigation led to them positively identify the remains as those of 43-year-old Daisy Shelton, a mother from Dayton. Shelton lived off Springfield Street and worked at Delco, an automotive electronics corporation. But police could not identify her killer. For nearly 60 years, the murder went unsolved. Now, a surprise confession from a witness to the crime has blown the case wide open. According to a missing persons report filed by Shelton's daughter, Rita, Shelton was last seen in late August 1963. Shelton reportedly left the house that evening, telling her daughter that she would soon return home to her 4600 Springfield Street address, but she never came home. For decades, this was all the evidence police had, and the case went cold, until an unnamed witness made a surprising confession. In 2017, a hospitalized man believing he was close to death confessed to a nurse that he had once witnessed a brutal murder. Hospital staff informed law enforcement, and soon police officers came to interview him. The man stated that he witnessed another man beat Daisy Shelton over the head with a hammer at a home on Springfield Street. The killer then dismembered her body and scattered the remains in various waterways in Tip City. The suspect the witness named was a man who lived on the same street as Shelton. He also worked with her at Delco. In his interviews with police in 2017, the suspect admitted that he knew Shelton. And although he was cooperative, he made a few statements that alarmed the police. The suspect told authorities that his DNA was likely to be on a box in which police found some of Shelton's remains. He stated that the box came from his home and that Shelton's murderers probably killed her there. He admitted he looked guilty and could possibly be convicted in court, the Miami County Sheriff's Office stated. Police moved forward with prosecuting the suspect, but he unfortunately died in September 2022 at the age of 92. The witness to the crime also gave testimony to a grand jury, but likewise died before the case could be prosecuted. For Shelton's granddaughter, Maria Walling, the news that the suspect had died was bittersweet. She was happy she finally had answers, but her grandmother still did not have justice. Walling also learned that police identified 3 men who were likely involved in her grandmother's death. All 3 died before the case went to court. I'm like, finally. They found the killers. There were 3, Walling stated. I'm going to feel bad for the families of these 3 individuals who are going to find out about how they killed my grandmother. It's very, very shocking that a human being can do that to another human being. And while the family has answers to who killed Daisy Shelton, police have yet to confirm a motive. Cold case homicides are among the most difficult investigators confront, but the Miami County Sheriff's Office remains dedicated to pursuing all open cases, the Sheriff's Office stated. Revisiting cases is a crucial aspect of bringing a sense of justice to the victim's family, even if it comes long after the crime occurred. Concluding cases even under these circumstances allows an investigation to be released for public interest and makes information available to the victim's family. Florida detectives investigating a 20-year-old cold case discovered what they believe are the remains of Autumn Lane McClure, a 16-year-old who went missing in 2004. Detectives were able to recover 99.9% of the remains during an excavation of a suspected burial site on February 28, 2024, said Volusia Sheriff Michael Chitwood at a news conference on Thursday, February 29. The sheriff's office is expecting the official identification soon, and then hopes to find a cause of death for the teen, the sheriff said. They said the remains appear to be those of Autumn Lane McClure, 16. Autumn was living in Ormond Beach when she disappeared. She was a mainland high school student who was last seen in May 2004 with her boyfriend. The boyfriend was dropping her off at a mall in Daytona Beach, Florida, when he last saw her, per the statement, and is not a suspect in Autumn's death. Police have named Brian Christopher Donnelly Jr. as a suspect in the case. He died in 2022 at age 49, Sheriff Mike Chitwood said during a briefing on Thursday. Jessica Freeman, Donnelly's girlfriend at the time, disclosed to officers his alleged involvement in the crime, said Chitwood. The couple was involved in a sexual relationship with Autumn. Now keep in mind, Brian was 31 at the time, Autumn was 16, Chitwood said. Her grandmother told authorities that during the initial days following Autumn's disappearance, she received phone calls and letters from her granddaughter claiming she was okay and would return home after she turned 18, police said. Freeman, who only recently began speaking with authorities on condition of immunity, told investigators that one day she returned home to see Donnelly allegedly choking Autumn in the bathroom. She was unable to save Autumn, she allegedly said, and she left the trailer where the 3 lived. Chitwood added, when she returned 2 weeks later and inquired about what had happened to Autumn, Donnelly allegedly told her, "Shut up, or the same thing will happen to you," Freeman claimed. Over the years, Donnelly allegedly told Freeman several times about how he had cut Autumn up and buried her and spread her parts over different parts. Authorities learned during the investigation, said Chitwood. In late 2023, Freeman contacted authorities to notify them where she believed Autumn's remains were buried. Before his death, Donnelly had allegedly expressed satisfaction at the fact new concrete had been placed on the site, she told investigators. Subsequently, Authorities worked with the new owner of a trailer on the property to excavate the remains. While official identification is still pending, the sheriff's office says an estimated 99% or more of the remains had been recovered from the site. The department is in contact with Autumn's family regarding the discovery. Remains believed to be that of a woman and her daughter, who have not been seen in nearly 24 years, were found at a southern West Virginia home on the same day that the girl's alleged killer died while imprisoned, state police said. A deathbed confession has closed a nearly quarter-century-old double missing persons case involving the fatal shooting of a 10-year-old West Virginia girl and her mother. Natasha Alexandra Carter was 10 when she disappeared from her home in Beckley, in Raleigh County, southern West Virginia, along with her mother, Susan Carter. The pair was last seen on August 8, 2000. The lead suspect in the disappearance, Larry Webb, had confessed to killing the mother and daughter and burying the bodies in his backyard. The suspect confessed on his deathbed to shooting and killing Susan and Natasha Carter, who had been missing for over 2 years. Over financial troubles, he said he was missing cash and believed that she had taken it and spent it. Officials said at a press conference in April 2024. It was a detailed, undeniable, unconflicted confession, Raleigh County prosecuting attorney Ben Hatfield said. The confession aligned with the investigative efforts and the evidence collected. The remains of the mom and daughter were discovered on Webb's Beckley property Monday, April 22, 2024. Webb was pronounced dead at a hospital 6 hours before the remains were discovered. He died at Mount Olive Correctional Complex in Fayette County, in what police called a bit of a poetic ending. Webb was previously indicted for Natasha's death in October 2023 and was placed in custody in April 2024 after the FBI took up the cold case in 2021. Police executed search warrants at Webb's home in 2022 and 23, and authorities said they recovered additional evidence in the investigation. When investigators searched his home last year, they found a bullet embedded in the wall of what was the girl's bedroom. The bullet was tested for DNA, which confirmed that blood on it belonged to the 10-year-old girl. During one of those searches, Webb told news outlets he did not know what happened to the girl and did not know when he last saw her. "I don't remember," Webb said. "I have dementia. I can't say exactly." Webb was indicted on a first-degree murder charge in October 2023 for the death of Natasha Carter, but was transferred to Mount Olive due to his health, where he could receive care while in custody, and died Monday, April 22nd. Natasha's father, Rick Lafferty, was on hand for the news conference Tuesday, April 23rd, and thanked investigators for their work in the case. "It's kind of a sad day, but also a happy day because I can bring my baby home," he said. The father also gave a piece of advice to others going through similar situations. Don't give up hope. 24 years. "This case went cold so many times I almost lost hope several times," Lafferty said. "If I could tell anyone in my position, just never give up hope of finding your child." A Virginia man has been arrested in connection to a 1986 cold case murder, and DNA has also linked him to another murder from the 80s. The Stafford County Sheriff's Office shared this week that a suspect has been arrested in the murder of Jaqueline Lard, a 40-year-old woman who was discovered underneath a discarded carpet in a wooded area in Woodbridge on November 16, 1986. Using DNA evidence, the same suspect has also been linked to the 1989 murder of Amy Baker, another local woman who was discovered dead in a wooded area, police announced. Harrison has not been charged in relation to Baker's murder. Cold case detectives from the Fairfax County Police Department are working alongside the Fairfax County Office of the Commonwealth Attorney to seek charges against Harrison for Baker's murder. In the case of Jaqueline's death, She was working at Mount Vernon Realty on Garrisonville Road on November 14, 1986. She was last seen that evening at 9 p.m. as the business closed. On the morning of November 15, 1986, the Stafford County Sheriff's Office said employees of other businesses in the area prepared to open for the day, but discovered a crime scene at the realty office, which indicated a horrific struggle. Jaqueline and her vehicle were both missing. The following day, 2 juveniles were playing in a wooded area near Railroad Avenue in Woodbridge and discovered a body beneath a pile of discarded carpet. Police identified the body as Lard. Her missing vehicle was found abandoned in Fairfax County on December 18, 1986. As part of the investigation, the FBI created a task force combining the efforts of the Stafford County Sheriff's Office, Prince William County Police Department, the FBI, and the Drug Enforcement Administration. DNA was extracted from the evidence, but repeated searches of the Virginia and national DNA databanks via CODIS, in addition to direct comparisons against submitted persons of interest and familial searches, failed to identify a suspect. After leads were exhausted, the investigation into Laird's killing was moved to cold case status, the sheriff's office said. More recently, Stafford County Sheriff's Detective Wood explored forensic investigative genetic genealogy to help identify the killer. 37 years later, on December 14, 2023, a family name for Harrison was identified using DNA evidence. Detectives ultimately obtained a search warrant for DNA from Harrison. In February 2024, the Department of Forensic Science reported the DNA was a match. Wood worked with Parabon Nanolabs, a company providing DNA phenotyping. The analysis of the DNA linked the Jaqueline's murder to the unsolved 1989 murder of Amy Baker in Fairfax County. A Stafford resident, Baker, ran out of gas while traveling on Interstate 95 and pulled off the highway at Backlick Road in Fairfax County. Baker met her killer while walking toward a gas station. She was raped, assaulted, and left for dead in the woods. On March 4th, Elroy Harrison, 65, was indicted by a Stafford County grand jury for first-degree murder, abduction with the intent to defile, aggravated malicious wounding of Jaqueline, as well as breaking with the intent to commit murder. He was arrested at his Stafford County home on March 5th and placed in the Rappahannock Regional Jail without bond. Our thoughts and prayers are with Jaqueline's and Amy's family and friends, and we hope this arrest can bring them some peace, the sheriff's office said. On November 7, 1986, officers responded to a disturbance call at a home in the 3600 block of Colbath Street. When they arrived, they found Barbara Villarreal dead from multiple stab wounds. Officers said a large kitchen knife was found near her body. At the time of the crime, police said Villarreal's husband was interviewed and eventually cleared in the murder. Police said DNA evidence was recovered from the scene and was entered into the CODIS database. Throughout the years, the FBI and Garland police detectives worked several leads in both the United States and Mexico, according to officials. Garland police said that the department used new technology, including DNA genealogy, that determined the suspect, 86-year-old Liborio Canales, was the brother of Villarreal's husband. Lovington PD said Canales was known to stay at a home in the city. The department said Canales had recently crossed the Mexico border and entered New Mexico to celebrate his birthday with family. Lovington PD said officers took Canales into custody Tuesday, July 18, 2023, without incident. Canales was booked into the Lee County Detention Center on a federal warrant for the charge of murder. While in custody, detectives said Canales admitted to killing Villarreal over a family dispute. His bond has been set at $1 million. Court records show Canales was extradited back to Texas and booked into the Dallas County Jail on August 18th. Back in 1986, Villarreal's husband was interviewed by police, but then was cleared. The husband was later killed in a shootout in Mexico in 1988, 2 years after Villarreal was murdered. Tuesday, March 12th, prosecutors say Canale's guilty plea to the murder came with a 20-year prison sentence. Garland police say the 86-year-old told investigators he was upset with Villarreal over some kind of family argument. While this was the first murder conviction using this technique in Dallas County, other similar cases have used genealogy. A little more than 3 years ago, the technique helped catch a serial rapist who was sentenced to life in prison. David Thomas Hawkins was 74 when he was arrested. Prosecutors say he was linked to 4 rape cases in the 1980s. In the early evening of Thursday, June 10, 1971, Raymond Scheublin, the president of the Lexington Trust Bank, returned from work to find the body of his wife, Natalie Scheublin, 54, mother of 2, in the basement of their Bedford home. She was face down on the floor, her ankles bound with a makeshift gag tied around her neck. Scheublin immediately contacted the Bedford Police Department, whose officers arrived within minutes. Based on the state of her body, it appeared that Mrs. Scheublin had only been dead for a short time. An autopsy subsequently determined that Mrs. Scheublin had been stabbed with a knife multiple times and struck with an unidentified object, causing a massive blunt force injury to her skull. The investigation revealed that a set of bank keys was missing, and that Mrs. Scheublin's vehicle, a blue and white 1969 Chevrolet Impala, had been taken. Police canvassed the area, interviewed neighbors, and looked for the missing vehicle. At 8:42 p.m., police located the Impala in the parking lot of the nearby Veterans Administration Hospital, less than half a mile away from the murder scene. Although the car appeared to have been intentionally wiped down to remove fingerprints, police were able to observe and collect several latent fingerprints from it, including one from the right rear window. Police pursued dozens of potential leads, but no suspect could be identified. In 1999, fingerprint examiners from the Massachusetts State Police used a new tool, the FBI's Automated Fingerprint Identification System, to attempt to identify the fingerprints found on the Impala and other latent fingerprints found at the crime scene. Through Automated Fingerprint Identification System, they were able to identify Arthur Massey as a potential suspect. Subsequent analysis of that print by 2 Massachusetts State Police fingerprint experts confirmed that the latent print recovered from the victim's vehicle matched Massey's left thumb. Police interviewed Massey in 2000, but he denied ever having been in Bedford or having any knowledge of the murder. In 2005, when police re-interviewed Massey, he changed his story, claiming that he had been solicited by an organized crime associate to murder the wife of a banker, and to make the murder look like a break-in, but that he had refused the solicitation. In 2019, the cold case unit created by Ryan re-examined the case, gathering information about the defendant's past in an effort to identify new witnesses. During the course of this wide-ranging investigation, detectives identified a woman who admitted that she had been involved with Massey in schemes to defraud banks in the 1990s. She revealed that Massey had admitted to her that he had organized crime connections, and that he had once stabbed someone to death in their home. That information, along with the other facts of the case, was presented to the Middlesex County Grand Jury, which returned an indictment of Massey for first-degree murder. When Massey was being held on the murder charge, he attempted to find someone to give false testimony in the case. According to prosecutors, from inside the Middlesex Sheriff's Office in Billerica, Massey wrote to a woman to recruit someone to testify that Massey had been framed, using a story he made up, prosecutors said. The accused killer allegedly offered $1,000 for the testimony. Massey's letters included escalating threats, including that he would order someone to hurt her, and that he would get to the woman like a bullet, according to the announcement. Investigators also found that the man told people outside the jails to collect on illegal loan sharking debts, prosecutors said. Working with the Middlesex Sheriff's Office, investigators were able to thwart the plot, and prosecutors brought an additional charge for solicitation to suborn perjury in the trial of a capital indictment. That charge was joined for trial, along with the indictment alleging first-degree murder. Arthur Massey, 78, was arrested in March 2022, more than 50 years after the death of Natalie Scheublin, and on Tuesday, May 14, 2024. A jury convicted him of first-degree murder in her death, as well as an additional charge tied to an attempt to pay a witness to offer false testimony in his case. Prosecutors noted that Massey has a long record of criminal convictions and prison sentences, has assaulted corrections officers, has twice been convicted of escape, and, as recently as 2016, was convicted of violating court orders involving harassment and abuse. Natalie Scheublin was a wife, a mother, and a cancer survivor who loved gardening and painting. She was brutally murdered by a stranger in her own home, said Middlesex District Attorney Ryan. For more than 50 years, this case went unsolved. Today's verdict is the culmination of years of investigative work and exemplifies the core mission of my cold case unit, providing answers to families, said District Attorney Ryan. Raymond Scheublin did not live long enough to see this case come to a close. He passed away in Maine on December 30, 2011, after a brief illness. He was 92. Raymond and Natalie are survived by their 2 children, Carol Bartlett and Kenneth Scheublin. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime content.